please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Beautiful day in February. But we know March Madness is just around the corner. We know what happens when they all start playing basketball games and such, what can happen, or hockey or swimming. Yes, we know what can happen, so be prepared. We start the meeting out with public comments. Anybody wishing to address the county board about any issues? Anybody wishing to address the board? I would just say, remember last time a young lady approached us about the snowmobile, the profitable, the gambling to enhance their snowmobile. And I was glad she felt that she needed to come here, and I do see we're approving it on today's agenda. So we're approachable, and something got done when she came in. It's a good thing. Seeing nobody addressing us, we'll move on to item 3, approval of the county board minutes from February 13th.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Olson, seconded by Commissioner Kavesi to approve the meeting minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Approved. Consent comments and approval of the agenda. Mr. Fritz?
I have nothing.
I have some announcements at the end.
Okay. Nothing? Commissioner?
Nothing for me.
Okay, all right. And I do have an announcement at the end also. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Pomeroy, seconded by Commissioner Kavesi to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Approved. Mr. Fritz.
I will read the consent business into the record. 5.1, approve resolution of Minnesota Trail Assistance Program. 5.2, approve resolution for LG 214 premises permit application, County Climbers Snowmobile Club of Watoka Tavern, or at Watoka Tavern. 5.3, approve Rapid Financial Solutions prepaid debit inmate release program agent agreement. 5.4, approve non-corporate resolution form to add Multi-Bank Securities, Inc. as a broker for Winona County investments. 5.5, approve the State of Minnesota voting equipment grant agreement. 5.6, approve Snyder Professional Services and terms of service agreements and approve transaction technology service agreement. 5.7, approve purchase of veterans van and recognize community for supporting veterans van program. 5.8, approve monthly resolution. 5.9, approve renewal of Winona County purchase of service agreement with Catholic Charities Diocese of Winona for guardian conservator services. 5.10, approve renewal of Winona County grant agreement with the City of Winona through its Senior Friendship Center for advocacy services to the senior citizens and information and referral services. 5.11, approve renewal of Winona County purchase of service agreement with Thomas Allen, Inc. for guardian conservator services. 5.12, approve resolution acknowledging City of St. Charles eligibility for state safe routes to school funds. 5.13, approve renewal of contract between Winona County and Fillmore and Houston County for the operation of a household hazardous waste management program. 5.14, approve Point and Pay LLC credit card services agreement. 5.11, confirm payment of disbursements. 5.16, appoint members to the Winona County Workforce Development Board. And that should complete the consent agenda.
Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Jacobs, seconded by Commissioner Pomeroy to approve. I apologize. I just wanted to comment on one item. The purchase of a second veterans services van. This is an awesome opportunity. It's actually going to provide more services to our veterans to get to other locations. And it's a great service for our veterans, and it's great that the community has volunteered and contributed over $20-some thousand to get that second van. So thank you very much to anybody that contributed to that van purchase. All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve the department recommendations. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Approved. General business, receive 6.1, receive and discuss planning commission recommendation. And is somebody here to speak to that? Luke?
Good morning.
Good morning.
This morning I'm introducing to you the buffer zoning ordinance proposal that's been working its way through the state rulemaking process, and it's been through our planning commission to adopt a local ordinance to implement that, and now it's before you. I've got a few slides here to run through, just a little bit of background, and then there's a piece of ordinance that the planning commission added at their meeting. Does everybody have this memo that was on your on top of your?
Yeah, it was here, and it was in our package.
Yeah.
Then there's also a flow chart that's updated from your packet that was also posted on your table.
That's different than what was in the packet?
Different, yeah, slightly different. And we'll get to that later in the presentation. This is what we'll talk about when we get to the piece of language from the Planning Commission. And then we'll do discuss, and we'll take questions at the end. What we're looking for today is just to set a date for a public hearing.
Lou, can I correct you on that? There's no required public hearing for the county board level.
I thought there was, because we're adding language.
There is not necessarily. It depends.
We can talk about that.
I love that.
If you would like to have a public hearing for
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Maybe move towards having a meeting for making a decision. Or perhaps we want to make a decision today.
It depends.
We'll talk with,
Love lawyers.
But precedence has always been set that the county board
Has a
has
public
public
hearing.
hearing when we change anything.
Let Lou get through
Okay.
what's being recommended, and then we can talk about the process, because the procedures were amended back in January for amending the zoning ordinance.
There you go.
Sounds good. So, first, a few highlights of the ordinance. What we were striving for is consistency between the shoreland ordinance and the buffer, the new buffer ordinance. The shoreland ordinance always had a 50-foot buffer requirement since the late 80s. When the buffer law came into effect here, it has been discussed over the last couple of years. There are some nuances with that. However, it was important that Winona County, we were trying to make it consistent, trying not to change the rules for the property owners in the county that have been trying to implement that over the past few years. It also establishes processes and procedures for the SWCD in Winona County to cooperate and hand off their work to the county. Clarifies where measurements are taken. That wasn't as clear in the shoreland ordinance. It's still, kind of clear as mud, but it does provide a little bit more guidance in the buffer ordinance that is before you than was previously there. It also establishes an administrative penalty order for noncompliance, which gives the county another tool or an incentive for gaining compliance from property owners. Reasons that Bowser gave for needing an ordinance included to clarify that variances are not allowed. So you cannot come in and apply for a variance to allow less than a 50-foot buffer, or then what's less than what's required from the state. It brings in line our ordinance with the state law and adds definitions and the DNR waters map, which they did a bunch of work, big mapping process through the DNR to designate which waters are applicable for the buffer law. In Winona County, what I understand is that it's exactly the same as the public waters list that was here before that shoreland pertains to. So not many changes in Winona County as far as that goes. Other counties, there were some significant changes as to where the buffer law applied and where it didn't, but not so in Winona. Bowser let us know in October that we were going to need to update our ordinance. Before that, we were hoping to get away with using our shoreline ordinance and not having to adopt a whole new ordinance. But they let us know in October that that was going to be required. They provided a model ordinance to counties, which we used as the framework for what we're proposing to you today. Bowser has reviewed, we've been in contact with them along the way, and they've reviewed what's before you today. They don't have any concerns other than the piece that we're going to talk about that came out of the Planning Commission. So at this time we can talk about that piece. There was one area that the Planning Commission discussed and wanted to include. This is an additional piece to the ordinance that they felt was important. It's concerning a local appeal process. Without this ordinance being adopted, the appeal would go to Bowser. So property owners would be able to appeal to the state. And that would be to the notice of noncompliance, is what I'm understanding from the SWCD. What we're adopting is a local appeal process, which would allow a property owner to appeal the corrective action notice that the county sends out. So we'll look at the flow chart real quick here that's before you. The way that the process works is the SWCD does their work determining compliance, who's in compliance, who's not in compliance. They send out letters and are working with property owners. They're out on sites if possible, checking aerial photos and maps that the DNR provides to them. At the end of that process, folks who are not in compliance or who have not reached out to the SWCD get added to a list of noncompliance, a notice of noncompliance list, and that gets presented to the county, to us, for enforcement action. If we do not have this local appeal process, the property owner has the ability to appeal that determination that they're out of compliance to Bowser. What we're proposing, or what the Planning Commission has proposed, is to add a local appeal process. And so once the notice of noncompliance would come to the county, we send property owners a corrective action notice. So we're telling them, you're out of compliance, here's what you have to do to come into compliance, and here's your time frame. And by the way, you have the ability to appeal this decision. So you can come to us and say, wait, this isn't correct. We're in compliance, actually, and they can present that information to the county to be removed from the violation list.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
Quickly. So at the Planning Commission level, I think along with the acceptance of the $87,000 to implement the program locally, we're taking on that financing to be the ones implementing the buffer program. We felt like if we're going to be implementing it locally, we should provide local relief too. So the appeals process just says that here we're coming in local. SWCD is determining the criteria. We're doing the enforcement, and here's the local relief too that goes with. We felt like that was a piece that should be in there. So looks like not many counties are doing that, but that was the discussion by the Planning Commission.
Well, one question I have, given that you mentioned that, is as I'm reading it, I'm not understanding the form of the relief. You can't get relief through a variance because that's not allowed by state law. So what? And as I look at the flow chart, it looks like it just goes like into a dead letter file.
No,
there's no flow from it.
it's the same language. Where we came up with the plan was, if you read the zoning ordinance, in a few different places it has an appeals process on the side. It's just a step to make sure that the constituent can say Winona County has followed the process correctly, or we feel like here's the step we feel like Winona County's either not measuring it correctly, not doing something correctly, and then once that process is played out, exhausted, then they still have the state. Right?
Yep. And then I guess it's also important to note that at the bottom of your flow chart, it does have an asterisk, and that would also, we propose putting this, the flow chart as well as the asterisk into the ordinance and the column to the right. At any time, without going through that local appeal process, they can come to the counter or to the SWCD, whichever is more comfortable for them, and present information that shows that they're in compliance. I think what the appeal process is going to be for is if there's a disagreement between the property owner and staff as to compliance.
So this would be a great deal like the other provisions that we have in the zoning code, where you can appeal to the Board of an Adjustment regarding administrative error.
Yep, and that's the process that we propose using. Instead of creating a whole other body to review administrative appeals for the buffer law, some counties have used other body. I don't even know, like a watershed district, or some other body could review these. We propose just using our Board of Adjustment to use it just like what's in our ordinance in Chapter 5 to allow administrative appeals for the buffer ordinance. So it would be exactly like what our current process is.
And I believe as this would play out, as it moves to the next step, it's more proof positive that Winona County's done their due diligence. We didn't try to push anything onto the constituent. It makes us more user-friendly to our constituents, proof that we're doing what we're being mandated by the state to do, and here's your opportunity for checks and balances on Winona County, and I'm sure it's going to prove out that Winona County has done exactly as we should have, and then it moves on. So,
Commissioner Kavesi.
Yeah, I just had a question. If the goal is to make the buffer process consistent with the shoreland ordinance, does the shoreland ordinance have this local appeal process involved in its string of?
No, the shoreline ordinance is pretty sparse. There's not a lot of requirements within that other than just the 50-foot buffer is required.
So how does someone appeal the shoreland ordinance, or if it's different than this?
It would
Do
be
they
under Chapter 5 in the normal process.
The normal administrative error appeal process.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add that with the shoreland rules, the DNR, this was by design, that they did not want, between Bowser and DNR, they did not want this to be opened up for variances for buffers. Shoreland does have its own performance standards, and they do have non-conforming use sections. That means if there is difficulties, the proper appeal would be the form of a variance. So those performance standards that are in the shoreland standards can all be by variance to the Board of Adjustment.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? We can go back to the actual language in the memo. So if you look under the first section of ordinance, the shorter section about halfway down the page, that is what is currently in the draft ordinance coming from the Planning Commission.
What page, do you have a page number you're referring
It's
to?
on the memo that was.
Oh, on the memo, okay. You've got us go in a lot of different directions.
My apologies. So if you're on the memo that was on your table this morning, halfway down the page, there's about 4 lines that is what was in the zoning ordinance coming from the Planning Commission. And really what that is just a part of the model ordinance that was a placeholder that gives the county the ability to insert a local process. What staff, if you would like to go with the local process, the local appeal process, what staff would recommend is the paragraph below that, proposed language establishing the local appeal process for discussion and addition. Starts right to appeal within 30 days of receipt. A landowner may appeal Winona County's issuance of a corrective action notice for lack of compliance.
Question, would there be a time frame that, I mean, with CUPs, we talk 60 days, but in both of these proposed sections, I'm not really seeing where there's a timeline established in here for conclusion.
Right, it's, so they'd have 30 days to appeal.
Yeah.
After that appeal process, they would have received a corrective action notice. There's, essentially, we're just asking them to come in and get in compliance over the next season. So this happens over the winter. If they're out of compliance, we have to give them time to plant crops, buy seed, do these things to actually get the buffer on the ground. So we're not giving them a short time frame. We're telling them they need to plan for this next season to get it in. Because over the course of that next season, if it does not go in, we're going to be issuing the APO, the Administrative Penalty Order, which will start accruing after, I think you have, if you look at the APO in the ordinance, I think you have to give them like 11 months.
So,
Right, Blake?
and eventually it would culminate in a daily fine of, what is it, up to $500 a day?
Right.
But, so we're trying to give the applicant every opportunity to come into compliance before we would put them in that position. So this is, it just shows that we're really doing our due diligence to give them the opportunity to do the right thing before those penalties come into
As
play.
a member of the Planning Commission, how do you feel about the substitute language?
I think I'm in support of everything, the work that the Planning Commission did, the work that the Planning Department has done, legal is.
So you'd find this suitable?
Yeah, I'm in support of all this, yeah. Mhm.
When Lou gets done, I've got some questions.
And bottom line is, we're really in good shape with, I don't think there's very few people who are not in compliance at this point, and there's got to be teeth in the law, and this will be it. There's a kind of additional 30 days in there, I suppose, for the constituent.
You know, after the APO accrues, that should get their attention. If that doesn't work, or we don't get paid, the next step is court. And there are provisions for forgiveness of the APO. Really, all we want is that they come into compliance. So once you come into compliance, really, it fixes everything.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Yeah, I just had a question. Does Soil and Water or the Planning Department or Bowser know currently which properties in Winona County are not in compliance?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we got that map.
We do.
Map.
Yep. I think.
You've
So
got
they're
it in your
currently
packet.
working through this process.
Yes,
Yeah.
and actually, this ordinance, we're kind of up against the wall because normally we would have sent a corrective action notice probably in January or February of the year.
So all of those landowners have been notified.
Yep, oh yes, yep, and we're not able to send that until we have this ordinance. So once this ordinance comes through, then we'll be following up with the notices of non-compliance from the SWCD.
Okay, has the Planning Commission received a list of those properties, or?
It's in your packet.
I think there's 20, somewhere around 20 that I'm
Oh,
aware
okay.
of that would be on the notice, and that was from November.
And
And
of
so I
those,
think there's been a couple more that Daryl's worked with that have come off that list now as well.
so county of population of 50,000, we've got 20 people who are not fully compliant. And of those 20 that are not fully compliant, it's not like they've got acres and acres of land that's not compliant. They've got, maybe a corner of a creek that nicks a field that, there's no one who's
There
even
are a
got.
couple that have pretty significant amounts,
There's
but
not any that have a full acre though.
really, out of the 20?
That I've asked Soil and Water, and they said no. So most of them are a partial part of an acre, and if they just swing a little bit wider with their machinery in a couple spots, they're going to be in compliance, and then they just have to throw in some seed. And, we're in really good shape. We
The
really are.
county has made strides over the last few years to come into compliance, and
Because of the shoreland ordinance. I just wondered if any of those people not in compliance had come before the Planning Commission. I don't know. I was at that meeting, but when it was discussed.
No, it hasn't gotten to
They
that.
haven't asked for this necessarily. Any of the people out of compliance didn't ask for this?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, we haven't heard from anybody out of compliance yet. There hasn't been any letters that gone out, or the county hasn't been. It's been really in SWCD's realm up until.
Yeah, and I do see this map. It's just a little hard to read. I need to look online because it's in color.
Yeah.
But when it shows the yellow on the map, it's showing that full parcel, but the part
It
of
could
that
be a
parcel
part
that's
of
in
No.
violation you wouldn't even be able to,
Pinpoint.
you wouldn't even show up on that map.
Yeah. So none of the,
Parcel's out of compliance because, one fraction, 1 acre is not compliant.
right. So any of the people out of compliance haven't really weighed in on this yet, although it could be a good measure for them in the process. Okay.
That's all I have. If there's questions, we'd be happy to field them.
Go ahead. I have some questions, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Commissioner Jacobs.
So since there was some question between you and legal staff on the need for an order, I'd be ready to support it and vote on it today, but I kind of think you guys should get that squared away and maybe bring it to another meeting or whatever you think.
We can always table it to,
Well, I can tell you what the ordinance says. The adopted on January 23rd, the amendment procedures, which is 5.4.2, 2B,
That's in,
or 2G and H, say that upon receipt of the Planning Commission's recommendation, which is what is happening today, the board may request additional reports or presentations to address specific questions or concerns raised at either the public hearing or by the Planning Commission for consideration by the board. Those reports would need to be received at least 7 days prior to the next board meeting at which the amendment is to be discussed. And then paragraph H is that the board shall adopt findings based on the record and act upon the proposed amendment within 60 days of receiving the Planning Commission's recommendation. So if there's additional questions that you have, I know that there had been some emails going around with some questions before. I don't know whether those were addressed. If there's additional information, we can make sure that that happens for you. At least on the agenda today was to discuss that and figure out what kind of a timeline or additional information you would like before making a decision.
Yeah, staff doesn't have any concern, so if the board doesn't, I don't see why you couldn't move forward.
I have a question for Commissioner Jacob. As a member of the Planning Commission, would you feel that it's necessary to have a public hearing at this level, or should we just go ahead and decide today? What do you feel like the public needs another chance to weigh in, I guess?
There was no one spoke at the last public hearing, correct? Yeah. And through this whole process, and sitting on soil and water liaison and being a rural commissioner, I've only had 2 constituents that have had concerns with this. By and large, a lot of it is really formality on a county that's been ahead of the curve, and we've just got to match our language with Bowser language so that we're in full compliance to really receive that 87,000 or the implementation of what we've been implementing since 1989. So I'd be ready to vote. This supports what the Planning Commission, the work they did. It supports what staff has done. I don't see any problems with it.
I have some questions. Having land that this affects, I have some questions. First of all, you said your goal was, it was clear as mud. Isn't the goal not to have mud?
It always is, but you know.
Clarify that point. Aren't we trying to avoid mud? Yeah, okay. So your choice of words, Lou. A question with following Commissioner Jacobs' line of thought, having agricultural land that butts up to a active stream. With our propensity to floods and high water and everything, how long, if your property is in compliance today, we have a major flooding this spring, how long is the compliance list good for?
The SWC does it every year, every 2 years. They have, I think it's every 5 years.
We need you to come to, and I apologize, you are,
My name is Blake Leah. So Daryl will review 1/3 of the county every year or all parcels every 3 years.
3
But he
years.
has to look at 1/3 of the county every year, and he'll have to shift that. And then so in a 3-year process, every parcel will be reviewed one time.
Okay, and is
Forever.
that Bowser's rules?
That's Bowser's requirement for the SWCD to get their funding, because they
Okay.
get separate funding for this.
Okay, all right.
work that they do. But,
All right.
yeah, so it's continuous reviews once every 3 years for every parcel in the county.
Because it can change dramatically from year to year.
Right, yep.
How does the city of Winona or any city comply with the buffer or the state buffer ordinance?
Well, it's my understanding that, that if they have agricultural land, then that would be, need to be buffered. Most of the city of Winona, I don't think that there are any properties in the city of Winona or any of our other municipalities that have agricultural land along a public water that would need to be buffered.
Okay, so this is strictly for this is a mandated ruling for strictly agricultural land. In your meetings and going forward, is there going to be buffer legislation for cities and parks and walkways and stuff like that? Has there any talk of that? Lake-owned, lake properties? They've just targeted ag land at this point in time.
They're targeting tilled land because of its likelihood of erosion. So because you're removing any cover, they target that. They typically aren't seeing that within cities because they're not tilling along the stream. So that is why agricultural land was chosen.
But there is a large amount of pesticides, make it green grass.
I want to add, though, that the city or municipalities in general have to meet stormwater rules. They have stormwater programs and PDS standards that we don't have or that rural areas don't have. So they have stormwater programs that are addressing any kind of construction that's happening within their municipality and making sure that soil, when it's turned up, isn't moving away or eroding. So, the cities are in general much more regulated than the rural areas.
Although when they stencil, this stormwater goes directly to the river, that's kind of evading.
This law specifically, though, is for tilled land that wasn't addressed otherwise, other than the shoreline.
And I think the reason for that is because sediment is one of the primary impairments of all of our streams in this area. So you're absolutely correct about pesticides, though, not being addressed at all. But with sediment being our primary impairment, they went for tilled land because that is the source of most of the sediment causing those impairments.
Okay, so with that said, when you spend time, energy, and effort looking at a dry run at the bottom of a forested hill, I would hope that takes lower priority. And I speak directly from a property. I mean, again, I was, as far as government overspending, and this is personal, as far as government overspending, taking time, energy, a stamp, a letter, to investigate a dry run at the bottom of a heavily forested valley, when you're talking sediment, I mean, the chances of sediment are pretty nil and none. So I would hope there's some prioritization of properties that are inspected. Now, I know you don't inspect them, and I've had this conversation with Mr. Buck at the Soil and Water Conservation District. That's just, okay. Reviewed. We talked huge fines. Who gets to keep the fine money if it goes to that level? Is that a county ordinance thing, or does that go to Bowser? Or
The APO would come to the county.
okay, so and the county can always remove that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it can be forgiven once the property comes into compliance.
Okay. And then
That provision is in the county fee schedule that's already been adopted.
okay. I did notice, and maybe I just didn't. You like to use acronyms just like everybody does in government.
My apologies.
That's okay. On page 198, you have, and I think this goes into our ordinance. You have the definitions, but I didn't. But I saw on this the can, and I didn't see the definition there. Corrective action notice. I didn't see it listed there, so we might want to just add that
The
one.
definitions?
Maybe I missed it. You use it on your sheet.
Yeah, we don't have We don't have a definition for corrective action notice or notice of noncompliance.
Yeah, so just, I mean, those should be added if we're going to use the acronyms, we should probably add those.
I know that it does talk about it in the ordinance extensively. It talks about, there's a whole section on the corrective action notice
Yep.
and the notice of noncompliance. But we can look at that and,
I mean,
see if,
It's just a little thing, I mean, if you're reading this section and you don't know what a can is, we should probably tell them what a can is. All right. I guess personally setting precedents, it sounds like everybody's ready to vote. I don't know, I think the public should have one more opportunity. We've just always done that in the past. We've had public hearings at the county board level. I guess we've allowed for change in the ordinance, and I've had a few people call, not a lot, because you're right, we've had this on the books since 1998 and
89.
or 89. 89. Would I have voted for it back in 89 as a landowner? It's probably it's been a taking in a lot of people's opinions, and that's been shared with me. Throughout the state of Minnesota, the whole buffer initiative is, a lot of people feel that it's a property taking. Should we be compensating them somehow with not paying property taxes on property you can't use? Well, there's that discussion, but
We have been looking into that. We actually have been working on a memo that's just about complete, and at this point, the county attorney's office opinion is that it is not, just based on a number of factors, but there were some changes recently with case law that we're making sure that opinion is in compliance with, so we will get that information to you, but at this point, it's our opinion that it's not.
okay. So the wishes of the board. We can either vote to accept it, we can have a public hearing.
Seeing as there was no input at the last public hearing at the planning commission level, every time we bring it back before the board, it takes more staff time, more, it's not free. It costs taxpayers money to rehash this for another meeting. I'd be ready to vote unless you think you can't support it until we have a public hearing, Commissioner Ward, or?
Well, the beauty of this is that this always needs to be reviewed and can be changed going forward. The ordinance allows for that, correct? If somebody wants to change something, so I guess.
I agree with everything you said. If this was 1989, I'd be opposed to all this. I don't agree with what the buffer stands for from a property rights standpoint, but this is a state mandate that we're not writing. We're just paralleling and matching our language with theirs on work that the majority of our landowners have already done. I can support it as written today, but I'd like to, if we can get unanimous support, I'd rather see that. If you need a public hearing to support it, I can wait. Or if you think you can support it today, I'd bring a motion.
Bessie.
Yeah, I'm sort of between both camps. That's why I asked Commissioner Jacob how he felt about having a public hearing. I understand all the reasons, but the Planning Commission did change the original presentation by adding that extra piece. And the public technically hasn't had a chance to weigh in on that. So I don't know if the public needs one more chance. The whole impetus of this change is to give the public more chances to weigh in on things. So if we give them one more step, I don't know. Do they need that? I'm still kind of in between. I'm not sure, but I do agree with both sides technically, So it's a hard choice. Does the public need one more chance when that's the idea we're promoting here, or can we just go ahead and rule on behalf of the public? Yeah.
I think it's whatever you feel comfortable with at this point.
Yeah.
Anybody else have an opinion?
Well, just to see how it goes, I'd move to approve it with the alternate languages prepared for the local Board of Appeals.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to approve as presented with the option
With
in
the
red now?
substitute amendment, yeah.
The substitute amendment, okay.
So that includes the asterisk language? Yeah, okay.
Right. Made by Commissioner Palmer, second by Commissioner Olson. Any questions? I do have a question. It seems like we have taken away the authority or the power or the intent of the Board of Adjustment because they are the variance grantee of any of our other rules. But who, again, clarify to me, who said they can't grant a variance? Is that followed
State
by the
law.
state?
Yeah, you can't grant a variance locally to state law.
Okay.
But we're doing just the opposite. We're not taking their authority away. We're giving them a step to be a part of the process. We're locally adding that in, that it can go before the Board of Adjustment, not to grant a variance, but to be heard that the constituent is being treated fairly, that Winona County is, it's an accountability step to prove to the constituent that Winona County is doing simply what the state has mandated that we do. It's really one more opportunity for compliance from.
Only 3 counties, I believe, we'd be number 4 that are providing that relief locally. Otherwise, the property owner would have to go to the Board of Water and Soil Resources.
Okay.
Or they have the opportunity at any time to come to the Planning Commission or to the to the Planning Department.
Right, at the counter, we
Soil-
can,
or
you
the
know,
soil
they can
and
provide us with information.
Right.
You know, they don't have to go through that process either.
What's the full time length that a possible, if the first letters have gone out, the county action notices, corrective action notices, and then if someone disputes that and they work with you, and then they still dispute it and they go to the Board of Adjustment, so already we're talking about how much time right there?
Well, I mean, it could be months.
Yeah, and then they have 11 months before it goes to an APO?
I shouldn't say that. If they have 30 days to appeal the corrective action notice.
Okay.
And then, we'd schedule for the next Board of Adjustment meeting. So within 60 days, 2 months, you'd have the appeal process taken care of. And then you don't have the ability to appeal after that.
Okay, so you're adding 2 months basically to the process.
And if you're looking at the time frame, that would be taken care of in the winter, previously to spring. Because we're going to be sending corrective action notices probably in January. So
it depends on seasonality as well.
yeah, we're keeping in mind planting cycles
Right.
and stuff like that for our.
But you said something that ultimately a court of law will decide. I mean, there is always an appeals process.
There is always an appeals process. It's called court. Yeah.
Law, yeah. So I mean, again, if it would get to that point, it can.
I feel like we as a board, planning department, soil and water, are all working towards how can we bring these people into compliance, not how can we issue a $500 a day. I mean, we're not upfront saying, here's our authority and we're going to impose it on you. We're saying, this is what the state is telling us to do. Here's the process to do it. We're trying to babysit you along. We're giving you every opportunity. We're adding one more step in here so they can come locally and try to see the gravity that they're going to have to come into compliance. I feel like we're being user-friendly to our constituents, and that's important to me, and I think this planning department has proven that that's how they treat the constituents. So.
If you're looking for unanimous support, with all that said, I can support it with, I think the term is with regrets. I don't like it. This whole thing, initially when you say even on a map, you put public waters, this is on private land, and the government is continually in my opinion, overreaching into public waters, and there's a long history there of what's going on, but Commissioner Cressy.
And, I mean, unanimous is good, and I have the same, I have different reservations, but I would be willing to approve it with regrets for different reasons. But, yeah, if we want a unanimous vote.
And I can agree with everything that you're saying. One other place we need to look is the Soil and Water District, who also have 5 elected positions, and they're supportive of what we're doing here too. So, I mean, we're working through democracy. This is playing out, and constituents have had multiple levels to weigh in on this. So,
Okay, so we have a motion. Any other discussion? All those in favor of adopting with this said language and the asterisks and everything, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, approved.
Thank you.
Moving on, 6.2, receive presentation from the Workforce Development Board President, Mr. Porter. Good morning.
Good morning. Morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, County staff. Let's see how we do this. I am Craig Porter, President and owner of Plasticert up in Lewiston, but currently Chair of the Workforce Development Board, and I've been on the Workforce Development Board long enough that I can't remember when I got on the Workforce Development Board. So, happy to make a presentation to you this morning. I don't know if anybody's ever really happy to make a presentation, but I'm one of them. And I signed up for an evening. I'm more of an evening guy, so I'm here in the morning. How do we advance this thing? Middle button? That's down. Okay, down. I know our previous executive director came and presented to you off and on, but I thought I'd do a real quick history in terms of what we do and literally what we do at the Workforce Center and the Workforce Development Board goes all the way back to the 30s, back in the New Deal legislation. And the Wagner-Pfizer Act in 33 essentially was when we really first started creating employment service offices and helping all those people that are out of work after the Great Depression get back to work. And the Wagner-Pfizer Act still exists to this day, although it's been modified some. But we get Wagner-Pfizer funds to help people do a job service and work and help people find jobs. Then in the 70s, the government really started getting industry more involved, creating these private industry councils rather than the government handling everything. Started trying to get some industry input. And then back in the 80s was a bigger push to decentralize from the feds and give more power to state and local. And that's where we really started dividing up states, gave the governors authority to divide up states into service delivery areas and got things going in that direction. And then there were some size requirements in terms of who could have a service delivery area, but some exemptions for a governor to make other arrangements. And then back in 1998, WIA was passed, which really was the really big push for local employment and training programs, and a workforce investment board system was created. And that's where we came about. And we did some changes to Wagner-Pfizer and also created the one-stop career centers that is basically our Workforce Center board now. The specific changes, I usually don't go into this much detail in my presentations. I don't like to busy them up, but because I apologize you didn't get it ahead of time, you'll have it for later on to be able to reference back to.
Thank you.
But with WIA, the governor was directed to create the Governor's Workforce Development Council, which kind of oversees everything that we're doing, as well as the Department of Employment and Economic Development. Created the workforce system and really focused on the three big customers that we're going to have: adults, specifically dislocated workers, and then youth in terms of helping them from an employment standpoint. Redesignated service delivery areas as workforce center areas. Oversee the creation of local workforce investment boards, or local workforce councils is what they're referred to here in Minnesota. You'll see those terms go back and forth, investment board and workforce council. And deliver that one-stop delivery system at the workforce centers around the state. There are, I want to guess, 47, 48, there's less than 50, but there are workforce centers. Our workforce center here, there's 47 more of them around the state in various cities and areas. They created 6 regional workforce development areas around the state, 17 local workforce development areas like we are here in Winona. We're in Region 6 and in the local development area 18. So that's kind of how the state is all divided up. We're down here in our little region. We are just, our county is a local workforce development area. For the longest time, when I was on the board, I thought we were the only one that was a county, but in fact, that's not true. There are some counties up in the metro that the county itself is a local workforce development area. A couple of cities are, the city of Minneapolis, the city of Duluth. The city itself is a local workforce development area. But all the rest of the state is divided up to multiple county type of areas where all counties kind of gang together to create a local workforce development area, and they work under a joint powers agreement where all those counties have agreed how they're going to work together to run their local workforce development area. And now, in 2014, WIOA was passed. It changed from Workforce Investment Act to Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act. And this is where they really started trying to take workforce development as a function of economic development and function in economic development into what we're doing from an effort. Really took additional steps to further engage the private sector in terms of our involvement in workforce, not just workforce, helping people find jobs, but planning for what kind of jobs are going to be needed out there. And then started tying in some performance objectives to what we're doing. We don't just, consult with the state and provide our one-stop operator with, hey, this is the kind of jobs we're looking for, but really started tying in some performance outcomes to how our workforce development efforts are going on. And then increasingly engage the Workforce Development Board in what we're doing. I'm embarrassed to say that I've been on the board for as long as I have been and really didn't start to really grasp the system and how it all worked until just since last fall when WIOA came into effect. From a structure standpoint, the feds, basically with their legislation, run everything. They direct the governor of each state to enact what they've legislated. The governor typically will, in our case, deed and the governor's Workforce Development Council are where their hands that they usually delegate to in terms of affecting what we're going on. And then next in the line is you guys, the local elected officials. And in your case, it's you guys. I mean, like I said, some of the other regions, there's multiple counties and joint powers, but in your case, you are the local elected officials over the top of our Workforce Development Board, and I think you're approving some additional members today and are overseeing us. That's why you have one of your members is on our board to kind of keep track of what we're up to. And then underneath both of us is the one-stop operator. And in our case, that's DEED, providing job service functions at our workforce center. We got this from DEED themselves, and to break it down even further for you. And in terms of our working underneath DEED, then to you, then the Workforce Development Board, the one-stop operator, which in our case is DEED. Under WIOA, we had to put out requests for proposals last fall to find a one-stop operator for our workforce center. And in our case, not everywhere on the state, but in our case, DEED answered that request for proposal. They were the only one, and we awarded it to them. So they are our one-stop operator. And then within that workforce center staff, all the functions and people that take place in terms of trying to find jobs for people and work with employers to find jobs that they need filled. A little bit more about what your responsibilities are. I'm flying in the dark in terms of how much you guys really know about what we do and how we do it, but really more about, you are the ones on the hook in terms of what we're doing and how we do it and the money that we spend, quite honestly. You are the county commissioners of our local elected official type of designation, and goes into more definition in terms of how you determine who that is, but in our case, because we're just the one county, it's pretty easily, it's all of you.
Porter, what is your budget? What kind of dollars do you work with as far as?
It's based on, it's delegated out, in our case, it's delegated out based on population. And so it's under $1 million.
Sure, it kind of goes up and down, but at any given time, you can say that we start out with about 1.1 to 1.2.
Per year. Okay.
Yep. So your responsibilities under WIOA is to appoint people like myself, be on the Workforce Development Board, and follow federal law in terms of what our requirements are and what we're supposed to be doing. And there is a fiscal liability there. Both the elected officials and the Workforce Development Board are responsible for the funds that we spend, as well as then the state also, all answer to the feds in terms of how money is used that's been given out to us. Then the funding system, funding overview. You really go from the state, from the feds to the state, to you, and then to us. In the past, they're again under our prior arrangement with DEED running everything. They were our fiscal agent, and then you people took on being our fiscal agent, which we really much appreciate. But quite honestly, because you're on the hook for it, I would think you'd want to be the fiscal agent, quite honestly. Then lastly, we always said integrating that funding through the one-stop centers and emphasize coordination on local workforce development boards and really being the workforce boards being much more interactive in terms of how that money is being used and where it's going than we were in the past. WSA management and oversight, certainly you are over us, but we have, and every workforce development area does have a workforce service area director who provides support for us in terms of the day-to-day activities and keeping us plugged into what's going on. We are all volunteers, quite honestly, and every workforce area, and we had one as well. There's an executive director that essentially is hired to come on and, whether full-time or part-time, provides direction for the Workforce Development Board. Workforce Development Board role. We all was really big in terms of putting much more emphasis on the Workforce Development Board and what our responsibilities are and what we do. Make us much more, rather than just providing input, to be a convener, collaborator, charged with hosting community conversations. They really do want to get the business community much more involved in what kind of jobs are needed out there versus just helping people find jobs. We had to develop a strategy for continuous improvement and strengthening our system as part of our plan, and we're also responsible for helping promote economic growth. And our leadership must develop a platform where all members actively participate. Our board has 19 people on it, and historically, we meet on the first Wednesday of the month in the morning, and everybody shows up and listens to what's going on, maybe offers a few comments, and it's my job as the new executive director, or as the new chair, to try and draw them out a little bit more and get a little bit more participation out of our workforce members. We're doing that through a committee type of setup. We had to create a local plan for how we're going to operate, who we are, and what we do, and I didn't include it in your packet information, but we can certainly get you that local plan. We had to talk about how we're going to engage all of our employers again besides, really start looking at engaging employers and meet the needs of both small and large employers. Create a system that opportunity for people with barriers, really focusing on the people with the unemployment rate as low as it is. It's kind of funny that it was enacted in 2014, but it was really foreseeing what the environment that we're in now, with a really, really low unemployment rate. Trying to find those people that maybe have had barriers to employment in the past and really emphasizing on helping those people get back into the workforce again. So it was timely, even though it was 4 years ago. Coordinate workforce development and economic development efforts. So we have requirements for our membership of people that are engaged in economic development. Partner with business, ensure the support of quality jobs, create entrepreneurial opportunities for business growth, and prepare youth. A big push on youth to be able to get youth prepared for the job market. We reauthorized career centers. They call them career centers. We call them workforce centers here in Minnesota. And the big core programs that WIOA pushes are working with adults, dislocated workers, and youth. Then also they want us all, in addition to those things that are required, adult education literacy is a requirement for us to have on our board someone that works with adult education. The Wage and Riser Act employment services that the Department of Labor does, that's federal dollars that come directly in. And then Rehabilitation Act, Title I programs, basically working with those vocational rehab type of organizations and getting those people gainfully employed as well. To be certified, we have to be able to provide those services to those 3 title areas that I talked about in the last slide. Some more information for you on the state dislocated worker program. That's been a big part in the past. I think even with a low unemployment rate, I think some talk about people losing their jobs isn't as common here in a low unemployment rate. But mergers and acquisitions have made a whole new light on the picture in terms of companies emerging, companies leave areas, companies enter areas, and so the job market is still pretty dynamic when it comes to dislocated workers, even though there's an unemployment rate so low as it is. So that's a dynamic area that they really want to focus on and be prepared for those types of events. And then the youth program. Some more details for you as far as the youth program goes. Those dollars come from the Workforce Development Fund. I should back up a little bit. Back down here, I get some information. The Workforce Development Fund that funds dislocated worker is actually a tax on us employers. It got incorporated, I don't know how many years ago, as part of the unemployment tax. And that's a separate body of funds that just grows, that's used for funding dislocated worker efforts. But now the state has started dipping into that for other things when it's not as needed like now. And then it also does fund the youth program as well. In our terms, youth is actually as low as 14, but all the way up through 24. And we are focusing on those economically disadvantaged youth that are at risk. Young teen parents, foster youth, juvenile offenders, any youth that has some barriers, and we're starting to put programs in place to try and help those people enter into the job market more effectively as well. Non-WIOA programs in the workforce centers, food stamps, MFIP, which you guys contract with them for, the SNAP program, are also kind of workforce center programs that are outside of some of the legislation that's been done. Bottom line, our big focus is, like I said, adults, dislocated workers, and youth. And not just reactionary, but work with employers to try and create a system so that we can further engage those three areas to try and not just find employment, but improve employment as well. In the future of the Workforce Development Board, really, it's been kind of an eye-opener for us. WIOA has really required the Workforce Development Board members to be much more involved in the past. For years and years, we just showed up, like I said, listened to what was going on, provided a little bit of input, and off we went. But WIOA is really starting to get into requiring some more commitment from the members. We've created subcommittees dealing on specific areas. We've got, what do we have? We've got a youth committee, an employer engagement committee, and career pathways committee. And those three committees are both Workforce Development Board members as well as engaging people outside of our committee and just community members in general that have expertise in those areas that can help focus on our efforts in those areas. And we also are forced now to work regionally. One of the other big aspects of WIOA was to work in those regions. I showed you the map where there's local workforce development areas and regional areas. In the 6 regional areas, we had to create a plan. We're regionally linked with Rochester, and we had to create a regional plan in terms of how we're going to work together to attain those same goals of engaging those adult dislocated workers and youth, people with vocational needs, that type of thing. We come up with strategies and service delivery agreements, and we're working on those as we speak. We got together and met and decided on sector initiatives. Those, some target work areas, manufacturing, healthcare, customer service, that we can really help people try and locate and figure out how to get jobs in those sectors. And those are the ones we're currently working on now. It requires us to collect and analyze regional labor data, establish some administrative cost arrangements, which we're still working on, and then other coordination aspects with regards to the region. And then talk about an agreement where how we assess how we're doing regionally and report that back to the state so that they can assess whether we're meeting their needs or if they want to talk about making some rearrangements. The other big thing, working regionally also means that now we're not just Winona, we actually are servicing people from other counties. If we look at, and I'll bring it up in a little bit, the 47 workforce area, development and workforce centers around the state, we're kind of shy in our area. There's one here and there's one in Red Wing, in South, and then Rochester, and then all the way over to Albert Lee is the next closest one. And so, although we're just Winona County and we just get funds based on Winona County's population, we're starting to service people outside of our county. So if you look at that state and all those regionals, if you look at just us, workforce center here, workforce center in Rochester, and a workforce center up in Red Wing. But these are all the other major cities in the area. We're seeing people from Houston County, we're seeing some people from Fillmore County, and we're certainly seeing some people from Wabasha County all come to Winona because it's easier to access our program and they come all the way over to Rochester. And so we are starting to spend some funds servicing people that we're not getting reimbursed for. And so I've been talking with staff about it, and I don't know, Jerry's probably not going to be too excited about me bringing it out here, but there's been some talk about Rochester wanting to absorb us, and I think just the opposite. I think we'd like to start having some discussions with our legislators about absorbing, Wabasha County and Houston County as far as our service area, rather than just Winona County, because in fact, we're actually servicing those people, and I think we could better service them. I think their economies are much more like our economy rather than the economy of Rochester. So those, I've started inkling to some people that that's the direction I'd kind of like to go in.
Oh, but Rochester would.
They're not going to be happy about that.
No.
In fact, keep it to yourselves if you could.
Having sat on that board
Yep.
for a couple years through our association with SEMSHRA, Rochester is, they're aggressive.
Yeah, and they would be perfectly happy to just take Winona and wrap it into them and take your money and provide services from there. And they would provide those services through our workforce center, but they'd be doing all the directing, and we wouldn't have a workforce development board here anymore.
Yeah.
So, and that's really about all I got.
Any questions?
Questions at all?
Thank you.
Nice job.
I have a question, having just come from a AMC meeting, the Futures. What discussions are you having about the new workforce, the millennial workforce? And even, what's the next one? The younger kids are
Generation Z.
Z.
Yeah.
So are you having, because there is a different thought process and
It was partly one of the reasons why one of the committees we created is the youth committee. And we just recently Jerry brought on board a youth coordinator at the workforce center to really focus on those youth, all of them, much less the disadvantaged ones, in terms of how to approach them, work with the employers on how to engage with them. Yeah, it is a focus of ours, definitely.
Okay, all right. And it was interesting reading an article last night, and I fall into this category. Technology has changed so much that I can go to somebody's house now and not know how to turn the TV on. Because it's such a, a simple thing as turning a TV on now has gotten very technology for some households.
It's true, and in the workplace, we, as an employer, we struggle with, it's the younger ones that when they're at a work center, one of my workstations, to keep their phone out of their hands. I mean, we joke around about confiscating them as they come in the door. But we've had some people, and we had some stern talks and even let one person go because they just could not put down that phone while they were working, and it really impacts our productivity.
The other day, we had just kind of a listening session. There were some faculty members and some school board members from Concord Fountain City came over. And one of the things that we all agreed on, they were trying to figure out, getting ideas from us on what to do with limited funds to try to take care of their own shop classes, what to do, because it's going to take millions of dollars to do certain things. By the time it was done, we realized that the old shop classes may not be a bad thing. You don't have to have all the new technology right now. And one of the things we started laughing about, but it turned out to be kind of gallows humor, we've all seen the television commercial about kids not even knowing how to change their own tire. They're even going to be looking at now utilizing that antiquated shop class to go back to simple things in high school about how to change a tire, how to check the oil, how to do certain things like that. And one of the things we're doing here locally, there's the REACH program and a variety of other programs, but one of the groups we're trying to reach, for getting that pun, is kind of the bubble kids. Kids that are doing incredibly well, or the kids that are at the bottom. There's always programs available for them. Forgotten about. And oftentimes both parents are working and everything else. So those are the ones that under we can reach, provided they meet some other requirements. So the two biggest areas that we're going after is the youth, because the other areas we were doing quite well in. And from the board perspective is now with the ag. So a couple of months ago, you approved the addition of Glenn Growth on our board. Glenn's getting us involved in a variety of other things. Plus, there's a new program at Southeast Tech with this sustainable agriculture. So the board is going along, and the workforce center, but with the leadership of the board and you guys authorizing that, we're getting much more involved in ag than we were never involved in that before. So.
Commissioner Kvesi.
Indeed.
Yeah, I appreciate the work that you do, and this was a very comprehensive report, so I look forward to having a copy of it. But I just was curious. I know the Engage Winona emphasis, one of the emphasis points is entrepreneurial, and so they're working with a number of points. One with an entrepreneurial kind of an incubator center with the university, and then also one about developing like a community kitchen for processing for farmers and things like that. I just wondered, are you working with the Engage Winona people in any specific way, or how do you work together, I guess?
Not in any specific way. It shouldn't come as any surprise that a lot of us that are on the Workforce Development Board are also engaged in other type of volunteer opportunities. So I think that's one of the beauties of our Workforce Development Board is that we are pretty, I sit on the Composites Consortium and other people sit on Engage Minnesota. And so our board meeting really talks about some of those other things that are going on and how can we complement them or even work with them. So constant conversation about those types of activities going on.
Those are focused again at the Generation Z and the millennials.
Yes,
so
definitely.
Yeah. And my daughter is a millennial. She's a contract freelance.
I have 4, and they're all millennials, actually.
Yeah.
So.
But with that being said, don't forget about your aged worker either. We need flexibility in the work. And government is horrible about this. We need flexibility in the workforce to keep the knowledge base that the aged, the retirement group is going out. We've got to look at things to keep them engaged in employment, part-time or flexible schedules and stuff.
I was just reading an article talking about, people that have retired and Social Security isn't cutting it, and so they're starting to come back into the workforce again. And as an employer, I can tell you that we're thinking along those lines as well.
Yeah.
The whole 8-hour shift thing doesn't exist anymore. If somebody can come in and work for me for 4 hours, I'll figure out how to do it. So it's going to be a very common contingent,
We get quite a few people that come in and get laid off for 20, 30 years for a variety of reasons. Those things happen. They have this most scared look on their face when they come in their 50s. Oh, nobody's going to hire me. And we tell them, and they very quickly find out that where youth used to be really looked at as a positive, it is completely flipped. So unless it's a physical job, employers would much rather, and we know that, they'd much rather somebody with years of experience. And it's harder for the youth to get the job. And it's much easier, so that's just, we don't have to do much about that. We're providing skills. If they want to go back to school, we'll try to find some of those monies to do it. But employers have already been ahead of us, and they're picking them up because they'll find something for them. They know they give them a schedule, they're going to show up for work.
When you talk about your comparing Winona and Rochester, I think it's great outreach that you're reaching out to the agricultural community, because when you look at where those stars are, agriculture is still a huge part of our economy in Wabasha, Houston, Winona counties, and Rochester is pretty quick to overlook agriculture. I mean, they're metro, and that's a good,
kind of sad. I mean,
that's a good mirroring of.
Being up in Lewiston, I've known it for a long time, but I heard, it was not that long ago, I heard an employer down here in Winona saying, well, yeah, I'm looking people up your way because the farm kids know how to work. So they started dipping into my workforce, and so that's out of Winona. But yeah, it's a big part of who we are, and yeah, it's something that we really need to address with those kids, giving them opportunities. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so
very
much.
much. for
Appreciate
coming.
it.
much.
Appreciate it.
You're
Thank you.
And by the way, on the fiscal side, Pat and his staff are amazing to work with. We have a few bumps, as Ken well knows, but it's getting there. Right?
Good.
He's really fantastic to work with.
That's not the first time I've heard that.
We can't do that. All right, moving on. 6.3, approve county administrator's compensation. And this follows up from, we tabled this last meeting so that we had a full board here. So entertain discussion on the compensation package.
I'm sorry.
Commissioner Olson,
Yeah,
Ms. Light.
I had pulled that from the consent agenda and wanted the full board here, and then I thought it should be on the general business portion of the agenda too. And I've had some conversations with Ken in the last couple of weeks, back and forth, and so I'm going to kind of say where I'm headed with this. As Ken had said, he wanted to be compared to the elected. And I asked them what elected, the ones that sit here that didn't take a raise, or the ones that are department heads and did take one. So we laughed about that a little bit, but the average and fair compensation, I think, is a good goal. I think it's recognized that that's the direction that we're heading. And we kind of went back and forth about the elected and our employees at the county, where a lot of the union contracts will have several steps to get. So we will say that we're going to make that position a average wage with the other counties, but it's going to take them several steps to get there. And the elected are on a little bit of a faster path to get there. So I mulled this over, and I kind of came up with something that I thought was fair, but I'll listen to everybody else.
Kind of interested in what you're thinking is fair.
Well, what my proposal was going to be was that we don't go all the way to the 133,526. What part of our conversation, my conversation with Ken, was that although he's been here not as long as many of our employees, he does come with a lot of experience, and I recognize that, and he's done a great job for us. So I was going to say I would go at 130, and I would make it retroactive to January 1st, not to his anniversary date.
Yeah, I certainly support the 133,526 that's recommended in the comparables. I think he's doing a great job. Many places he's saved us a significant amount of money. He was there when we needed an interim planning director, when we needed an interim community services director, filling in not just his job, but another job at the same time. Those are huge salaries that we would have been paying had he not been able to just step right in and do those. He's brought us, a number of programs that are saving the county money. The enterprise vehicle, that was his initiative, solar electrical program. He's been very active in the community. I've seen him at Township Officers Association banquet. I've seen him at Family Night at the Farm, at the History Center Public Officials Forum, Eggs and Issues. He'll be this weekend at AMC, or the next few days at AMC. Those are certainly, there'll be a lot of hours right there in the next few days that, not time that he's with his family. I think he's going above and beyond, and to receive anything other than the average that we're given the other elected officials, I think is a little insulting for as good as he's doing. And I guess I can make a motion any time, so I'm going to move to approve the administrator's salary at 133,526. We could discuss whether it's retro to September 9th or whether it's, I'll make the motion that it's retroactive to September 9th, 2017. Discuss it from there.
We have a motion made by Commissioner Jacob. Do we have a second for discussion? I'll second for discussion. So the motion is to set the county administrator's salary at 133,526, retroactive to the anniversary date. Further discussion. Commissioner Kavesi, I think you had your light on.
No, I was going to ask Commissioner Olson if he was making his proposal in the form of a motion, but we have a different motion on the table.
Right.
So,
Right. Commissioner Pomeroy?
I would move to amend the motion to go along with that, but to make it retroactive to the first payroll of the year. I just think that that's fair for all employees, and I don't see a real need to carve out exceptions. And I just think it's fair that it's done with everyone the same way.
So,
I would accept that on my motion.
Okay. All right, so we have an amendment to the motion to make it retroactive to January 1, 2018.
First
correct?
payroll.
First payroll
Yeah.
in January of 2018. Okay, all right. Any further discussion? I have always been, I don't like the system that we've used, but the board in the past has adopted the system. For some reason, the union adopted the system many years ago, and I think the comparables are, in my opinion, are not comparable because some of the counties have a much huger budget than we do. But anyway, so I don't like the system, but I have always advocated for a pay for performance. And actually, the administrator is the only person that I'm able to do that with is pay for performance. And I greatly appreciate, Ken, Mr. Fritz provided us just this last a week or so ago, his list of savings. So now, on record, I have a high bar that I can hold him to, right? I expect that it's said that in this memo, and this is it's a public memo, that Ken, in total efforts, just in one department, community services, has saved us like $306,000, almost $307,000 from his short time having to fill in with the absence of a community services director. Am I reading that wrong?
Yeah, I think that number would be annually. Some of those have already reoccurred more than 1 year.
Right.
So that number is much higher than the 300 that year. When I added up, I came up with 824,000. Okay. Is what the savings are. And what I really look forward to is he's spending 2 days a week already over in community services. I think we're maybe just scratching the surface of what lies on the horizon with community services. So I certainly want to, I don't want to say reward our administrator. I think this is just a fair salary. I don't think it's just being fair. We were fair with everyone else, and this is fair, and he's doing a great job. So,
Commissioner Kavesi.
Yeah, I agree that we need to treat everybody fairly. I think, and I agree that Administrator Fritz is kind of in an in-between position. He's not an elected official, so he's not coming as a member of those elected officials, which we put in steps to reach their average salary. So, but it seems to me that the same conditions apply. I would like to, the amendment makes this retroactive to January 1st, but does not change the $133. Is that $133,000? Okay. I would be more in favor of putting that full amount in steps, just as we did for some of the other groups that came to us. I think it just gives a little more incentive, and I appreciate the work that Administrator Fritz has been doing. So I would be in favor of putting it in steps.
it already is in steps. So, I mean, he
No, I
doesn't
mean,
get to.
not the full 133 requests today. Move to 130,000 as Commissioner Olson was proposing. And then keep it going. Next time we're going to increase it more based on performance or whatever, just as we are for the other department heads.
Well, and I indicated, and I'm probably a minority, but I didn't, in my mind, I didn't establish steps for the electeds because every year is different and we cannot tie the hands of future boards. So it's it's not.
Steps is not an appropriate word, but we're doing it gradually based on performance. If they come back next year and have additional performance, obviously the averages will have moved up again by next year, so we'll have a different target. But that's okay. That puts it on performance and a little bit of incentive. So that's just my rationale for that.
My button working?
Mr. Fritz.
A couple of things. First off, I wanted to thank the board for the opportunity to work for Winona County, and I've certainly it's been great working with you guys. On the issue of saving money, that, I just want to make sure I point out, that's a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I've helped push that process and worked in the process and been totally engaged, but Pat's been involved with it, Maureen's been involved with it, the staff over at Community Services has been great. So I don't want to go without saying that. I don't want it to look like it's just all me. The other part, in terms of the steps, I use the same formula in the second page of the report that the board has, where if you look at the average salary for the county administrators based on our comparables, it's $142,000. I use the same formula as a gradual increase each year, 2018, 19, and 20, that we use to present what the direction would be if the county boards kept to that plan each year for elected officials and then for myself. So the 133 already represents a step toward the average, but is a good $9,000 less than the average. So that I think you might clarify that question you had about in terms of moving toward it. And to Chairperson Ward's the point about each year, the out years 2019 and 20, just like I did with the elected officials, those are just to show you the impact. That you can't, I would recommend, as with elected officials, that you look at it each year, look at the current salaries and the comparables each year, because they could change. They could maybe not go up as much. They certain times they might be, less of a percentage. In some cases, maybe their boards don't increase maybe they feel they're topped out or something. So you have to look at it each year for these year-to-year positions, unlike the unions, which negotiate multiple years. So I think there are some differences there, but again, it is phased in over time, suggesting that the board would have to make subsequent decisions in out years. So hopefully that helps kind of clarify it.
Okay, Commissioner Jacob?
Well, and it's easy to lose sight of history or where we've been, but whether it's collaborative effort of everyone involved or our administrator, it wasn't very long ago where we had a stack of data requests that we were continually really getting bad press, bad media over. Things are really the quietest and the smoothest we've seen them run in years. Administrator Fritz stepped into multiple lawsuits with the frac sand and the past administrator. This was really a mess that we brought him into. He's brought with him years of experience. To me, anything less than average just seems unfair and unacceptable. So, I made the motion and I'm supportive of it.
Commissioner Olson?
And I agree with all the comments, and as Ken would know, I mean, part of our conversation, the money wasn't real important to him. I know when he started, he wanted more vacation, which we granted. I do look at this as it's a hybrid position. It's not an elected. Although we're asking him to be the administrator over the elected departments. And then we have the employees who take the 10-step process through their union contracts to get to that average. So that's the only reason I came in a little bit different. I certainly, the $3,500 isn't a deal breaker for me to support the motion with the amendment on the table, but that is why I came in with what I did. It was no disrespect to Mr. Fritz. I think through our conversation, he knows where my feelings are. I think we had some good banter back and forth.
Any other discussion? All right, we have the motion to set the salary at $133,526 with retroactivity to January, first pay period in January 2018. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will have to say that Ken, if you ever send him an email and ask a question at probably 10 o'clock at night, he'll probably answer you. I don't expect that. Because then I got to think about it again too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But you've always been very responsive, very approachable, and I think that is a good asset that you carry. But like, again, you've set a high bar now. We expect a lot out of you, but I know we'll get that, so thank you. All right, moving on, 6.4, discuss and appoint citizen advisory committees. And by the memo, apparently back in, I think we agreed in December, but I probably didn't say it in January, the Planning Commission, the wishes of the board and my wishes are to reappoint Arlie Herber and Chris Myers to their, in their rotation so that they would stay there. We already took care of the Board of Adjustment. Now we have the Parks and Environment. We had some applicants and a reappointment.
So, since I sat on that committee, I reached out to Mr. Engen, and
Yes.
he definitely desires to sit on that board again. He had just maybe was unaware that he needed to reapply, but he's a great asset to our community, doing a good job. So I would certainly recommend that we reappoint Mark. He's still got 2 terms left that he can serve. So.
Okay, all right. So we have, do we have a second to appointing Mr.
I second that.
Okay, all right. Any further discussion? Not seeing any, so all those in favor of reappointing Mark Engen to the Parks and Environment Committee, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Okay, approved.
Do you have to make appointments down here below where it says there are 2 vacancies that need to be reappointed?
I thought you just did.
No,
just did.
that would have been the,
Oh, no, that was the other one, yeah.
that's the, Mark Clark was appointed, and then actually, the group, in December, we did agree to.
She just did
Herb,
with
yeah.
Chris Meyer and Arlie Herber, both were the 2.
Right, and apparently I didn't do that in January. So, so I think it's official now.
Gotta be official,
All right,
yeah.
We pounded together, it's
Record,
official.
yeah.
All right, my error, I apologize.
Very
My
good.
error. 6.5, monthly financial and budget. Mr. Moga.
January updates, revenues in the, we'll start with revenue from the beginning cash budget at $14.2 billion. We had revenues of $257,000. Actual expenses were $1.7 million, ending cash is $12.8 million. I won't talk about the whole year because it's basically the same as what it was in January. The variance is negative 1.5 compared to negative 1.2. And if you look at all the funds that are being presented, it's a negative 2.7 compared to negative 2.8. Nothing really standing at this point. It really is just 1 month, and really January is a lot of, we pay a lot of upfront expenses, kind of your insurances and workers' comp, some of those one-time expenses. Any questions on this document? If not, we'll go to the summary document. Beginning cash budget of 19.6, revenues were 627, actual expenses was 3.4, ending cash is 16.8, and again the variance is the negative 2.7 compared to negative 2.8 to 2017. Any questions on that one? Otherwise, we'll go to the summary budget. Summary budget is 8%. There's nothing really at this point standing out that I think is really that big an issue. So I think at this point we'll just kind of wait as time goes on and see what happens as we get into the report for February and March.
Could I ask one question? On that particular budget document, didn't we used to have community services as a separate line item on there? It looks to me like it's been combined under total revenues and total expenses. Because we always watch.
I'll make that adjustment as we go forward.
I know we always view that as a separate.
Yeah. And I did look at their expenses were like 8%, so they're right in that 8%
All right.
range. But yeah, I will make that adjustment going forward. And then the interest is at the bottom. I kind of just point that out because one of our audit items is that the auditors want to make sure that we're pointing this out, is that we've brought in about $5,000 for the month of January compared to our budget of $150,000.
Just maybe this is because of the cutoff. Why is January only 8%?
Because if you take
You cut it off before the full year?
Yeah, 1 divided by 12 is 8.
Okay, all right.
That's 96%, isn't it?
No, it's 8 point.
8 and a little.
8 and a little.
8.333, yeah.
I mean, if you look at the.
0.25,
I mean,
I don't know.
It
Yeah.
should be 12, I mean, 112, anyway, just a little
It
bit.
is 112, that's 8.
Trying to slip something by us, Pat.
8% is 112.
8.3?
Yeah, 8.3. So I kind of look at it as like, we go 8, 17, then 25. So
Yeah.
it
Right.
varies just a little bit. Just a little bit. But I guess if you would like, I can do the 8.3.
No, that's okay, that's okay. Just, your calendar's different than mine. All right, thank you. Committee reports. Commissioner Kavesi.
I just wanted to explain some of the handouts I passed out. Some of these are from the SHAC meeting from the other day, and I thought that had some very good discussions. First of all, the local Public Health Association of Minnesota is having a Public Health Day for meeting at the Capitol and discussing with our legislators some of the public health initiatives. And considered as some of the public health initiatives are these Department of Health information sheets. One of the presentations we had on Friday from the Department of Health staff included some legislative discussions related to state and also related to federal budgets. But part of the federal budget is this graph, which shows that in 2010, we had a new fund added to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, called the PPHF, the Prevention and Public Health Fund. So they took over a lot of the prevention activities as well as some of the public health activities. And you can see on the graph that even adding that, what the federal government did was decrease the amount for the CDC. So technically, they're doing more work with similar amounts of money. The current presidential budget requests or proposes that Prevention and Public Health Fund will be removed. So there will be no additional money for what has now become core public health activities. So that we're going to be working at a shortfall. And then in addition to that, there are percentage decreases to all of the departments at the federal level, with 30% for the Health and Human Services budget. So just out of that fund, Minnesota has, out of that Prevention and Public Health Fund, since 2012, Minnesota has received $87 million, with $17.5 million coming last year. So that's a significant amount of money that's not going to be in our budget. That's just an information item.
Could I just mention something quick?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem as though the federal government really adopts budgets anymore. They
It's
normally
all
go by
up in the air what's
continuing
going to happen.
resolution.
Yeah, so
it may or may not.
yeah, but that's a significant decrease. The other piece of information comes off of a website, and I put the website on the top for you because the information is a little hard to read. It's tiny print. But it's the results first, and I've been updating the board on some of that information as it comes out. And this piece of information covers the assessments on juvenile justice programs. So those that have been deemed effective, proven effective, I was pleased to see are several of the ones that Winona County uses in different programs. We use restorative justice, we use trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, we use truancy interventions, we use mentoring, and that's just some of the ones that I could pull out. So this shows that I think we are using many of the proven effective programs, and I think that's really important. This judgment or this assessment comes out of the Minnesota Management and Budget Office, not out of the Department of Corrections or the Community Services Department. So they don't have a hand in rating their own programs. This is a neutral office that rates the programs. Two other things. One is that there will be a video conference for local elected officials on April 24th. It'll be from 12 to 1:30, and it deals with the Department of Health, with the public health options as we're going along. So that'll update us on some of the information that we already have. And the other thing is just a fun event. We approved the donation today for the Veterans Van. There is a fundraiser on March the 10th from 11 o'clock to 3 o'clock at the American Legion Post on Sarnia. The Veterans Auxiliary is sponsoring a spaghetti dinner for $8, and that money will go to the Veterans Van program fund. So that's a really important part of what we approved today. There's more donations to come in as we support that activity. So December 10th, put it on, March 10th, everybody needs to eat spaghetti at the American Legion. So thank you very much. And I do appreciate the chance to attend the SHAC meetings. I think Commissioner Ward and I made a pretty good tag team with some of our comments at that meeting, so thank you.
Following up with Commissioner Kovesi's at the SHAC, the new Commissioner of Health, Jan Malcolm, one of the topics that's been, on the press is all these negative reports from our elder care facilities, and they're aggressively working through all those complaints, and they're down. And I did urge, and I have it in the past, is that as county commissioners, we're tasked with, taking care of the health, safety, and general welfare of our citizens. And in part of that loop of public health, we have no idea what's going on in that sector of our health care. And so I have encouraged them to somehow keep us in the loop. If we know of something that's going on in our own backyard, we should be proactive. And she agreed with that. But she's doing a great job trying to clean up that situation. Another thing that's hot on in the press these days is the shooting that happened in Florida and at the school. So Chief Deputy Jeff Mueller is head of a active shooter training that's going on it's a regional. It's going to be held over in Fillmore County. So any volunteer response people, county commissioners can go and observe. But that is Saturday, March 10th. I think it's so critical to have these, actual trainings that people will be hopefully better. Hopefully we never have to use that training, but if we do, that there is some semblance. And with that said, and Officer Mueller is going to follow up on this. There's a lot of trainings. Some training that this board is probably behind on is the NIMS training. I think probably.
I'm current.
You're current?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm current anymore because it's been so long.
Well, I've taken all the courses I needed to take. I don't know if you have to do them over.
I don't know either, but there's trainings, and he's going to follow up on and make sure that Winona County is up to date on trainings.
I'm sure Greg needs to get up to date.
Yeah.
I took them all.
Yeah.
Oh, did you? Yeah. Okay.
But again, there's been changeover, and he admitted in his own department, new staff and everything. We have to make sure that we're up to date, and a new emergency manager position will help with that. One last thing is FEMA's coming to town. Anybody that really likes to work with FEMA, and you talk about flood water, we talked about water buffers. This is flood control. They will be here on Friday, March 9th now this is 2 to 4, and I had a note that said 10 to noon. Did they change it again?
I don't know.
Oh, we'll have to double check because I said 2 to 4 on a Friday afternoon. Is it 10 to noon? I thought that was a strange time to get our attention on a Friday afternoon about floods. So I think, the email I got, I think, said noon to 10 in this room. And it's talking about, the big overall flood maps and everything that are so critical for our region because of the Mississippi River and all our streams and everything, going back to 2007 when we had terrible floods. And then just a process. Now, we had a couple of people that applied for positions that we did not appoint. Do we have in the process to send them? You redact addresses, so I can't do it easily. Do we send them a thank you for applying? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that they acknowledge that we received it and that, okay, thank you. With that, I guess, any other business for the Winona County Board? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Commissioner Olson, second by Commissioner Jacob to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Nay. We're adjourned. Thank you.